Well, the Christian school movement has responded swiftly and in unity to the Australian Law Reform Commission recommendations tabled in Parliament last week by the Attorney-General, Mark Dreyfus. In a joint statement, the three major Christian school organisations said it was a direct attack on faith and freedom of belief in Australia. Now, joining me now to discuss this is Mark Spencer, the Director of Public Policy at Christian Schools Australia. Mark, thanks very much for your time. That's a big claim that you've made in your media statement. It might take many people by surprise. Why is this not hyperbole? Why is the situation so serious?
It is a big claim, Lyle, and not one that we make lightly. I think I've spoken to you previously about the consultation paper that the Law Reform Commission released in January last year, which really shocked people of faith across Australia and drew a strong response at that time. It was a consultation paper that had a number of proposals within it that really would have drastically impacted faith-based schools. The final report, which we understood from discussions with a number of people would be more moderate, has actually gone much further than even that consultation paper proposed. If you were looking at something that was going to really cross every T and dot every I about how to stitch up Christian schools, you just need to read that final report. I think I described it the other day as the epitaph on the grave of faith-based schools in Australia.
Wow.
It's that comprehensive a hit job on faith-based schools.
Well, you're not holding back, Mark, and I know as we spoke last year and we spoke again earlier this year that you've been very concerned about this ALRC process. You guys even declined to take part in it because you believe that the government was acting in bad faith. You're saying it really does spell the death knell of Christian schools. My next question was going to be, will it be possible to operate an authentic Christian school in Australia if these recommendations become law? I think you've given us the answer.
Certainly not in the long term. I mean, what the proposals do for those people who haven't read the 400 and something page report is that they remove all our protections under the Sex Discrimination Act, and they propose putting in some very, very conditional protections in the Fair Work Act. But even in those protections in the Fair Work Act, which are quite conditional and require a court or tribunal to determine what they think is going to be necessary for us to be a community of faith, effectively impose their hypothetical view of what a faith community looks like onto Christian schools and other faith-based schools. Not only does it do that, but it prescribes, it excludes from that consideration any issues that are protected, any factors that are protected under the Sex Discrimination Act. So any beliefs or doctrines or tenets we might have in relation that touch on sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital or relationship status, or pregnancy, any of those protected attributes under the Sex Discrimination Act. If we want to believe anything about that, the government would be saying, okay, that's fine, but you just can't act in accordance with those beliefs because that would be illegal. If not illegal, then certainly subject to extensive litigation to determine whether it is illegal or not.
Yeah, that's right. You've said it could end up being a lawyer's picnic. The ALRC report says that LGBTIQA+ rights, and it's quite specific about this, that they essentially must trump parents' rights and the rights of Christian school communities because religious schools, the report says, are inherently harmful to same-sex attracted people and to transgender people. Now, you and I know that's a lie, but it's a powerful fake news narrative that's driving this debate. How do you counter that?
You counter it by one-on-one conversations. You counter it by getting people who are actually involved in our schools to talk to their friends, their family, their neighbours, their wider community and tell about the good news of Christian schools. That's what we've been trying to do with our campaign website, mychristianschool.au, where we've just collected a whole bunch of stories from parents, from staff, from students, telling people about the great things that are happening in Christian schools across the country. Now, people who are coming to our schools know the sort of nature of our schools, who we are, how we care for everyone. But when I go up and visit MPs in Parliament House or in state and territory parliaments, they seem to live in a very separate world where they really don't understand the great things that are happening in Christian and other faith-based schools.
No, that's right. And of course, there's been a powerful lobby group that's running around up in the Parliament, state and federal as well, countering the good work that you guys are doing. And just to be clear for our viewers, I know we've talked about this in the past, but it's a complicated technical legal issue. What you're seeking here is the ability under law to remain free to have those legal protections to employ staff who actually believe what the parents and the school community believes about things like marriage and gender. That's essentially it. You're not trying to sack people unjustly. You're not trying to expel gay kids, but you want to just have that reasonable accommodation to employ the staff who will be Christian and live that out. What's wrong with that?
I don't know is the short answer. It seems fairly reasonable.
Yeah.
And if we're a political party, we could, lawfully just determine based on political belief who we employ and who we don't. Yep. And that's one of the great ironies in this discussion. As a religious body, we're not allowed to act in accordance with our religion, it seems. If we're a political party, we were. Now, we're very open about who we are. No one comes to work in our school, no one enrolls their child in our school without knowing who we are, what we believe, and our position on a whole range of these issues. That's made very clear. You've got a choice whether you come or not, and increasingly people are actually choosing to come because they want what we're offering in terms of enrolments increasing. But with staff, we make it clear to staff. We have that in their employment contracts. Sometimes we're criticising the media for being so open and transparent about that, ironically, despite that being a recommendation of the expert report back in 2018.
Yep.
So we're open, we're transparent. We make it clear what you can expect when you come and work for us. And all we're expecting is, if you come and work on that basis, then how about you stick with that basis, or if you don't share those beliefs anymore, you move on to somewhere else where you're more aligned with the beliefs of that particular organisation.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's crazy that, this sector of society, because it holds a religious view, has to be compelled to do what no other sector is compelled to do. It's employ people who don't actually believe in what they believe. It's just, it's nuts, and I think people have really got to get their heads around what's at stake here. Mark, with all the evidence that's emerged about the harm that gender-fluid ideology is causing children, we've seen the National Health Service in the UK ban puberty blockers on children because of this is all stuff that stemmed from rainbow ideology. They're now walking it back. Why do you think the government here is not more aware of what's happening overseas? And why aren't they therefore more respectful of parents' desires through their schools to protect children from role models who might advocate these things which are now being banned overseas, which we still allow here?
Well, not only do we still allow it here, we've just had New South Wales laws passed to basically entrench that ideology in under their conversion practices ban legislation. Legislation was rushed through Parliament in a week with an all-night sitting to make it happen. All this rush for legislation that doesn't take effect for 12 months after it receives royal assent. So, in New South Wales, it follows some other jurisdictions where they're putting in place legislation that really supports that affirming model. All in a rushed attempt to get it through quickly, all ironically or tragically, really, a week after the NHS announced that they wouldn't be prescribing puberty blockers. 2 weeks after those leaks from the WPATH group about some of their claims about it being evidence-based, but acknowledging that it really wasn't evidence-based. So the international evidence on that particular issue is shifting dramatically. At the same time as governments around Australia are seeking to embed those same WPATH guidelines almost as the only approach to dealing with this issue in Australia. It's crazy.
It's mind-boggling.
I can't explain to why it happened because I have no understanding of why it would.
Well, I'm interested, Mark, you're up at the Parliament a lot, you talk to a lot of politicians. Are they not aware that the trends are going against this radical transgender, LGBTIQA plus gender fluid ideology, and yet at the same time, they're trying to force your schools to have people who support those views work in your schools and be role models to their children? I mean, this is essentially potentially putting children in the care of potentially harmful role models. Is there just no awareness? Are our politicians in a bubble?
Look, what we're dealing with is a long-term cultural narrative, and I think you'd be aware of that from your time in the trenches. And I can give people a plug to your book again to go and read the history of some of this stuff. This has been a long-term campaign. There were, I think, 21 proposals to change the marriage laws before they finally succeeded in doing that. So we are dealing with a very strategic, very long-term political campaign around this, where truth has not always been the basis for that campaign. So we're on the back foot. I think in the long term we will we will be able to get back some of these freedoms, because I think generally people in Australia support common sense proposals. We've just released polling in the last week that says 80% of Australians, when asked if they support our right to employ staff who share our beliefs when they're clearly stated, said yes. Australians, Middle Australia gets this.
Yeah,
Middle Australia understands this. Middle Australia is rejecting those sort of radical agenda. But it's just taking time for politicians to get that message.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And, well done on that polling. 80% of Australians, are with us on this. Yet again, the politicians are pursuing a narrow ideological agenda. Just to further unpack, I think the affinity we have with mainstream thinking, as a parent, and I think most parents would think the same. I think it would be entirely reasonable for a Christian school where my kids go to not employ a staff member who attends a taxpayer-subsidised animal fetish party wearing kink. And now, if you think this is an extreme example, this is what happened at World Pride, Sydney World Pride last year, all advertised on their website, funded by the New South Wales taxpayer under the Liberal government, then Liberal government. Now, that as I say, that might sound like an extreme example, but I don't think it is, given given the amount of public money that goes into trying to attract people to radical pride events. Do you think our politicians understand the position they are placing religious schools in insisting that they must employ people who might want to attend events like this and then be role models to children?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think there are some very legitimate questions to be asked about some of the government funding to some of these bodies. Ostensibly, a lot of it's actually around healthcare and health prevention strategies, and yet we see it seeming to be used for advocacy in some of these other areas. But that's probably a side issue, but a good question to raise with MPs at one point. When it comes to the nature of our schools, that's a fundamental question. The law reform proposals do preference. They give special treatment to those particular views, and they say, as you indicated earlier, they say they should be trumping mainstream views and mainstream values. In a big survey we did, I rate over 8,500 responses from parents across our schools, and they were coming to our schools. 74% said it was extremely or very important that we are able to teach traditional Christian values and beliefs. And our enrollments are increasing. Our parents are flocking to our schools. Our problem is finding places for all the people who want to be in our schools. Our schools have waiting lists now because mainstream Australia, mums and dads, suburban Australia, want to have those traditional values and beliefs. They're rejecting that sort of ideology, and we're just wanting to make space for them.
Yeah, I've heard you say that a number of times, and it's well known for those who are watching this debate that the enrolments of Christian schools are increasing and have done since same-sex marriage was legislated and since things like safe schools became more into the public's consciousness and parents became concerned. Can you give us an idea of what those figures are? What sort of percentage of the Australian population are educated in Christian schools like the ones your organisation represents, and what's happened with the enrolments in terms of percentages or some sort of numbers that you can give us?
Well, when you look at education broadly, more than a third, in some jurisdictions up to half of students actually graduating from high school are coming from non-government schools.
Wow.
And that's been the growing sector. Now, 20% of the overall student population, roughly, are in Catholic schools, faith-based Catholic schools. The independent sector is around the other non-government schools, which have a range of ideologies, some educational philosophies like Steiner or Montessori. Others are often faith-based, from Islamic schools, Jewish schools, Christian schools. And they'll vary in the way they do faith formation. And they'll, as Christendom does, vary about their views on some of these issues. But, you'd be looking at probably around 10 or 20% of the total students in Australia are being educated in schools which have a traditional view of marriage and family and sexuality and sexual behaviour at their core. And those numbers are increasing. And part of our concern is not within our remit as Christian schools, but we're also very concerned about the opportunities for families where there aren't non-government schools, aren't faith-based schools in the area, who are going to government schools where they are very much exposed to this worldview.
Yeah. Yep. So obviously, the Catholic sector is huge. Your sector is quite large. It's growing, and it's not just parents from Christian families who are voting with their feet and going to your sort of schools. Your Christian schools are receiving a big uptick in enrolment from mainstream people who aren't necessarily religious.
Yeah, exactly. We have most of our schools are open to all comers. We certainly have a large number of families in our schools from other faiths. They respect the fact that we respect faith, that we have views around these things. Islamic families, Hindu, Sikh families are often coming to our schools. But even people of no faith who have that traditional mainstream view of a fair go, traditional concerns around family. They want families to be protected. Yeah. They don't like the way governments overreach into family. And as much as we're talking about the impact of this legislation on Christian schools, we're really just there as a proxy for families. If we can't teach what the families want, it's really undermining the family's rights, the parents' rights to actually raise their children in accordance with their beliefs. A right that's protected in international law, but not protected in Australian domestic law.
Yeah, that's right. You guys, and we've said this before, you're the canary in the coal mine here. They're not going to stop at crushing Christian schools. They're going to go after families and anyone else who dissents from rainbow ideology. Mark, why do you think that after years of advocacy, and you mentioned you and I have been involved in this for a long, long time, but there's been a lot of brilliant work done by Christian legal academics, really eminent people who are well qualified, highlighting Australia's international law obligations to protect parents' rights and religious freedom. Why has all this been totally ignored? Is what we're seeing by Mark Dreyfus and the government now just resorting to the use of raw power just to crush freedom of religion at this time?
Well, I'll just go back and be clear. The ALRC is a report to governments, and actually a government report, and the government hasn't responded to it. So I'll just be a little bit careful about that.
Yeah, look, that's me editorialising a bit, but Mark Dreyfus did set the terms of reference, and I think he's pretty keen on this becoming law. But that'll be my comment. But go on.
And we'll see where this lands. But certainly, as you said, there have been enormous amounts of energy, time and money and resources spent. And I think the Prime Minister talked about more than 10 inquiries over the last period and 70,000 submissions. 70,000 submissions on this issue. Yeah. I mean, that's an enormous amount of work that's been done. We've had some very highly qualified lawyers trying to provide sensible solutions that actually find a way forward, that provide appropriate protections for people of faith and balance those appropriately in accordance with international law with other human rights. There are solutions around this, and those solutions are actually put to the Law Reform Commission. Now, they've been very selective in their use of international law and their quoting of international law, and they've just not really, it seems, fully engaged with the proposals that have been put to them, or for ideological reasons have simply rejected them. There are solutions to this. There's been a lot of work in good faith by faith groups and their advisors to find a solution that can be enduring, that can have bipartisan support, and can put in place a mechanism that we're not relying upon the courts to try and make these decisions on an ad hoc basis. And that gives no one any certainty and clarity, and just means all our resources are spent in litigation rather than education. We don't want that. We want the clarity. There are ways of doing that. We've put forward those solutions. All it needs is for the government to actually adopt those solutions and put them in the law.
I think the problem, Mark, from what I've seen, is that those solutions which various legal academics have proposed over the years, and yourselves, involve tolerance from the other side. The willingness to let Christian schools be Christian, but they don't want to do that. They want us to conform to their particular worldview, and I think while ever that's the case, it's going to be difficult. But Mark, the Prime Minister, speaking of how we can find a way forward, the Prime Minister has said he won't legislate unless there is bipartisan support. Now, the opposition hasn't seen the legislation properly yet. They're not willing to commit. Is the best option going forward some sort of a stalemate that preserves the status quo?
Well, depending if the alternative is a bad law, that's absolutely the best option. There are ways forward that provide a bipartisan solution, that provide a better option, where the current provisions, which are a very broad exemptions written in the language of the 1980s, which, by the way, Mark Dreyfus had no problem with when he introduced changes to the law in 2012. but those now seem to be unacceptable. We understand that. We want to get through that. We want to make sure we can be clear with people about what we do need. We need the ability to employ staff who share our beliefs. We need the ability to teach what we believe. We need the ability to make sure we can run our schools as communities of faith with some standards around discipline and behaviour that reflect those beliefs. If we can't do those simple things, then we really cease to be faith-based schools as we know them, and parents are wanting them.
No, that's right.
There are ways of making that protection happen that don't involve necessarily the current legal exemptions and would be, I think, clearer for people to understand and a more helpful solution. If we can't get that, then I think the status quo is better than going backwards as the Law Reform Commission would propose.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, if we don't get tolerance from the other side, I can't see a way through. But the other potential solution the Prime Minister has floated this week, and what's been a chaotic week up in the Parliament, is the possibility of doing a deal with the Greens to pass the legislation. Now, that's obviously provoked an alarming reaction from you and your sector. You guys have put out an open letter to the Prime Minister and the Attorney-General today, urging them not to betray religious schools by doing a deal with the Greens. It just shows how powerful the Greens have become, that a thought bubble like this from the PM has even said out loud. We're in dangerous territory, aren't we? Just to help our viewers understand why it would be so dangerous for the Prime Minister and the Labor Party to team up with the Greens to pass a solution for your schools.
The Greens have no desire to see faith-based schools continue. They've made that clear in their previous policies. They have no commitment to religious freedom. They would be imposing a solution upon us, again, that wonderful tolerance that has no tolerance for alternative views. They would simply not allow us to be continuing to be faith-based schools of the kind we are, and to hold beliefs around sex, sexual orientation, gender, or marriage, or relationship status. And they don't want those views held, and they will just stamp them out.
Yeah. I want to try and help our viewers and listeners just understand a bit more about the politics of all this, why it's so fraught. And I appreciate you giving time to this. And I understand if this is a bit sensitive, you've got to maintain relationships in the Parliament. I understand that. But the Liberal Senator Dave Sharma, who's recently been instated by the Liberal Party back into a Senate vacancy here in New South Wales, when he was last in the Parliament as the member for Wentworth, he was one of 5 Liberals who sided with Labor and the Greens to torpedo the last attempt that was made back in 2022 to try and protect religious freedom. So he helped bring that down from his own side, siding with Labor and the Greens. Another Liberal warrior for LGBTIQA politics, Tim Wilson, was last weekend pre-selected to contest his old seat of Goldstein at the next federal election for the Liberals. So the Liberals are clearly happy to have people in the Parliament who don't support the freedom of schools and parents to have these rights to educate the kids. Now, how do you, Mark, how do you navigate a political dynamic where not only Labor, the Greens and the Teals are hostile, but the Liberals' powerful left faction is also not in the corner of parents and religious freedom?
Look, it's certainly a challenging political dynamic. And as you said, we do try to maintain good relationships with all parties. Even the Greens we've been in discussions with around some of these issues. The challenge is to actually help people understand where international law actually lies and where good policy lies in the centre of this. For most of the MPs, they actually are committed to good policy. It's only a small number of ideologues who will reject that out of hand, and we're still hoping and praying that there will be enough of a majority across all parties to have sensible and balanced policy in this area.
No, that's good perspective. Mark, like you, I've been around Christian schools all my life. I went to a Christian school from the age of 9, sent my 4 children to Christian schools. Always really appreciated the sector. I'm a product of it myself. I know that principals and boards are influenced by culture and the politics and the media, and they're often risk averse. They're worried. There's pressure to compromise to avoid negative headlines, etc. Do you see this as the Christian school sector's Daniel in the Lion's Den moment? And do you think principals, boards and those churches who do run schools as a ministry, are they ready to stand up to the government and protect their students and parent communities from this attack on their freedom and faith? And
that's a great question. I mean, it is really the line in the sand moment. It won't be something that happens overnight where we'll suddenly, not be able to employ staff. It'll be a long, slow decline if these measures come in place. If we can't find ways of employing staff who share our beliefs, if we can't teach what we believe, then there really is no point in having so-called Christian schools that can't be authentically Christian. And our boards, our principals have indicated previously that this really is the line in the sand for us. We will look as hard as we can to see how we might be able to comply with the law. If we can't, then really we may have no option but to consider that. And certainly that's a question we've been in discussion with our schools around. I don't think anyone's considering closing their Christian school tomorrow or next year, but we will need to have careful advice and careful consideration of what the future could look like under these sort of proposals.
Well, I'm sure your incredible public advocacy and that of your colleagues that are working with you, and the media you guys have generated in the last week or so, and in the years leading up to this current crisis has been phenomenal. I'm sure it's inspiring many principals and boards and leaders in school communities. Let's hope that continues. Just finally, Mark, on a bit of a lighter note, you and your colleagues were up in the federal parliament this week delivering hot cross buns to politicians and the media. Do the politicians get the irony of crucifying religious freedom in the lead up to Easter?
Look, we weren't trying to have a particularly political message around that. We were just trying to really share, our belief in the good news of Christ and his resurrection of Easter. It seemed like an appropriate time. Not always do we have a sitting week in the week leading up to Easter. So we thought we'd take this opportunity, and certainly there was no one who rejected our hot cross buns. It's a wonderful, high-quality Canberra hot cross buns, and they all seem to be well received. But certainly the irony was not lost on us, as we were trying to be good witnesses to Christ and his good works in what's a very challenging time for religious freedom.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful gesture, Mark, that you guys did, and it's a great witness and a great way of showing goodwill, particularly it's important in this holy time of year. Mark, really appreciate you being so generous with your time and being willing to unpack some pretty thorny issues on what is an incredibly important debate for everyone of faith in this country. So thanks again for your time, and wish you and your family a happy and a holy Easter.
And to you and yours. Thanks, Lyle.